Shabbos nekabla. I love that song. We sing it on Friday nights. That's the Boy V'Shalom from Lecha Dodi. What's up, everybody? Great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. We're starting a new track date today. It's so exciting. Track date Kesubos. Who is with us on a Friday afternoon as we're getting ready for Shabbos? Yehudit in South Carolina, John in Maine, Pauline in Chicagoland, Yehudit wishing me a safe trip. Thank you so much. A reminder, I'm going to the Maccabiah games in Israel, departing Sunday. Going to be packing tomorrow night. So today's our last class for 17 days. We're going to reunite on Tuesday, July 26th at the regular time then at 6 p.m. And we'll try to do a highlight show, maybe 2 highlight shows, to review all the material missed during these 17 days. My plan is that I will keep reading my page every day. I hope you will also. And I will try to post from Israel. I won't be teaching the class from Israel. It's just not realistic while I'm coaching 2 teams. I'm going to be very busy. But we'll try to keep everyone in the loop on what's going on at the Maccabiah games. It's like the Jewish Olympics in Israel. There's going to be a tremendous, amazing, spectacular opening ceremonies next Thursday at the Teddy Kollek Stadium outside Jerusalem. Super excited. But today's our last class until July 26th. Lindsay in Cincinnati, Bella in Florida, Tom says good Shabbos, Gordo checking in from Scotland, Renee in Indiana, Michelle says Shabbat Shalom, Sharon is at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport educating the masses, Michelle is in Washington, Cecil in Arizona, Paula says Shabbat Shalom, Paula's in Chicago, Christo says, Mazel Tov on a new volume of the Talmud. Been a long time, but I've been keeping up as much as I can. Have missed all of you. Great to have you with us today, Christo. Belle says, Shabbat Shalom from North Texas and a safe travel, Sal, and an uneventful stay at home for you, Nina. Lovely. I went through a stay-at-home time while my husband was at post-grad studies, and it's not so easy with kids. True that. Paul in the great Northwest. Paula says, amen and be safe. Lindsay says, safe travels. Thank you. Tracy in Oklahoma. Pauline, safe travels. Charles in Omaha. Bill in mid-Missouri. Christo says, the trip will give you a good break from teaching. You know, I love teaching. I really, it's a joy for me to be with you every day. It's always a little bit of a challenge managing time to prepare the show and teach it and then digest it afterwards, posting the subjects covered and everything. But I'm going to miss you guys. I really am. Arthur says Shabbat Shalom. Rex checking in from St. Catharines in Canada. And thank God YouTube is working again. Marie says Shalom Sal. Have a safe trip. Welcome everybody. Yeah, it was so funny. I just got an email today from Vimeo. So I don't have to get into the technicalities of it, but basically I use this Mevo camera. In order for it to send the signal to both YouTube and Facebook, it has to go through a service provider called Vimeo, which is not cheap, but it's certainly worth it so that we can put it on both places at the same time. And but for the last 2 days, it didn't work, right? So I finally found out the problem was with Vimeo, not with Mevo, not with my system. And just today, I got a advertising email from Vimeo. Hey, work with us, buy our product because we farm out to multiple destinations. And I'm like, yeah, well, it hasn't worked the last 2 days, but it worked today. Thank God, no more of that glitch. I'm really happy about that. All right. It is such a thing with the sages, right? So that if for example, if the sages were going to teach you about making dinner, right? So normally we would think, well, if I was going to take a class in making dinner, first I would think about, what is dinner and how many people are going to be eating, and what would we like to eat, and how would we procure the food, and how would we cook it, and how would we serve it. But if the sages are going to teach you about making dinner, they might start with something like, at what times of the year does dessert come an hour after dinner? And at what times of the year does dessert come 2 hours after dinner? You're like, but what's dinner and what's dessert and when do we start? So this whole section of the Talmud is about family and marriage, etc. But we started with the very unusual case of a man died without having had a child, and he left a brother and a widow, and they have an obligation to marry each other. Now, in Tractate Kesubos, we're going to back up a step and talk about getting married. Okay, so what is this volume about? It's about the marriage contract, the ketubah, right? So in Ashkenaz pronunciation, the kesuva, and plural ketubot, right? Modern Hebrew, or more Ashkenaz Hebrew, kesuvos, and that's how I'm pronouncing it, because that's how I learned it the first time through the Art Scroll Talmud edition of the Talmud. All right, we're going to be talking about the marriage contract, which you would draw up before you actually get married, in anticipation of getting married. But where do we start? At the beginning of the tractate with the wedding itself, and what day is the wedding going to be? Okay, well, the sages choose to start with questions that they find more interesting. They assume that all the sages who are in discussion about these laws already know the basics. That's why they often jump into the more interesting questions. Okay, so like every tractate, we begin on page 2. This is Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud, the laws of the marriage contract. Page 2, Mishna number 1. A virgin is married on Wednesday, and a widow on Thursday. Now, the reason for the former is that the virgin is married on a Wednesday is because twice a week courts convene in the towns on Monday and Thursday, so that if the husband had a claim concerning the bride's virginity when consummating the marriage on Wednesday night, he would go early the next day to court and make his claim. That's Mishnah number 1. Now the Gemara. Rav Yosef said that Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said. Due to what reason did they say that a virgin is married on Wednesday? It is because we learned in a Mishnah elsewhere, on page 57 of this tractate, if the time that the groom designated for the wedding arrived, and the wedding was postponed, and they were not married, the brides, plural, are entitled to eat from his food, and if he is a priest, they may eat teruma, right? A priest eats teruma, food consecrated for the use of priests only, but they can share that food with their household, with their children, with their parents, but especially with the wife. Now, the wife, who's the daughter of a Yisrael, cannot eat teruma until she joins the household of her new husband, the priest. What's interesting here is, but if the wedding was scheduled for a particular day, and then the wedding got postponed, it's still considered as if she has entered his household and she begins to eat teruma already. And likewise, just this law of sustenance, that a woman, right, who is in charge of feeding her, who is responsible for feeding her when she's growing up, her father, Until when? Until he marries her off, and then she is married to her husband, and now it's her husband's responsibility to feed her. Obviously, very patriarchal system. They didn't contemplate that women had their own careers, although there were women who had businesses that we read about in the Talmud, and we read yesterday about a woman who was an innkeeper. Nonetheless, in terms of the legal responsibility for her sustenance, she goes from her father's house to her husband's house, and you would think that that obligation would only begin once they're married, right? But here we're being taught that if the day of the wedding arrived, the day designated, and they didn't get married, he has to feed her anyway. Now, one might think that if the designated time arrived on Sunday and the wedding was postponed, he would provide her sustenance beginning on Sunday. Therefore, we learned a virgin is married on Wednesday. Until Wednesday, the designated time is not considered to have arrived, even if the original date was earlier in the week. And now we should wonder, well, if the reason they're getting married on Wednesday is because court convenes on Thursday, and if there was a problem on the wedding night, that the husband discovered that his wife, who he thought was a virgin, was not a virgin, it's not that a man can't marry a non-virgin. It's that if he's expecting to marry a virgin in the ancient world and discovers that she's not, big problem. But you would think that if that's the big issue, why do they have to get married on Wednesday? Why not on Sunday? If you're telling me that the reason for the Wednesday wedding is that court meets on Thursday morning, well, court also meets on Monday morning. So why not get married on Sunday? They're going to talk about that, but basically they're telling us you might have thought it was on Sunday, but it's not, right? The wedding needs to be on Wednesday. That's the rule that we just learned in the Mishna, and we'll hear more about why. After citing the statements above, Rav Yosef said, in astonishment, Lord of Abraham, by which he means Shmuel, the sage Shmuel. Shmuel makes that which is taught dependent on that which is not taught, using the latter to explain the former. And the Gemara asks, what does Rav Yosef mean? Right? The Gemara asks, which is taught and which is not taught? What is he talking about? Something that is taught and something that is not taught. Both this Mishnah is taught and that Mishnah is taught. If a Mishnah is taught, it's taught. And the Gemara answers, rather, Shmuel makes the halacha, makes the law that is taught in the Mishnah here, whose reason is explicit, dependent on a law that is taught in the later Mishnah, where the reason is not explicit. And citation of the later Mishnah contributed nothing to the understanding of the Mishnah here. Right? So due to what reason? I mean, it seems like not so unclear. Rav Yosef said that Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, due to what reason did they say that a virgin is married on Wednesday? It is because we learned in a Mishnah elsewhere. Oh, right. So it makes sense in our Mishnah. In the Mishnah it said they get married on Wednesday because court is on Thursday. Shmuel says, and Rav Yosef is thinking like, what's going on? Why is he saying that? Why did they make it on Wednesday? It's because we learned elsewhere, if the time that the groom designated for the wedding arrived and it was postponed and they were not married, that he has to feed her from then on. And that does seem a little bit indirect. How is that related to what day we need to have the wedding on? So rather, if it was stated, this is how it was stated. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, due to what reason did the sages in the Mishnah say that a virgin is married on Wednesday? It is so that if the husband had a claim concerning the bride's virginity, he would go early the next day to court and make his claim. Okay, that's consistent with our Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, but if that is the reason, let her marry on Sunday, as then too, if the husband had a claim concerning the bride's virginity, he would go early the next day to court and make his claim. So the Gemara answers, the sages were assiduous in seeing to the well-being of Jewish women and instituted that the wedding take place on Wednesday so that the groom would exert himself in arranging the wedding feast for 3 days, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and on Wednesday, he marries her. So Just when you're thinking, my goodness, how could this system be any more patriarchal? It's all about, if he wants a virgin. If he doesn't get a virgin, he's going to rush to court and declare that he didn't get a virgin. But the sages say that whose responsibility is it to arrange the wedding? Seems like these days, right, it's so often, it shouldn't be the case, but it's the bride and her family. They pay for the wedding. They arrange the wedding. Not so, according to ancient Jewish law. It's the husband who not only has to pay for that wedding, he has to arrange the wedding, and he has to exert himself to arrange the whole wedding party, a festivity, the whole thing. And so that he has time to do it, he has Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then they get married on Wednesday. Why couldn't they do that on Sunday? Well, then the day before the wedding would be Shabbos, and that definitely seems less practical. So the Gemara continues, and now that we learned that the reason for the ruling in the Mishnah that a woman is married on Wednesday is that the sages were assiduous in the matter of making sure that a bride gets a proper wedding, right? They're caring for the bride, that she should have the wedding she deserves, and that the husband puts himself out to arrange it. So now that we know that that's the reason she's married on Wednesday, then with regard to that law, which we learned in the later Mishnah, if the time arrived and they were not married, the brides are entitled to eat from his food and eat teruma if he's a priest. One may conclude, if the time arrived on Sunday, since he is unable to marry her because he is busy preparing the wedding feast, he is not obligated to provide her sustenance until Wednesday. Now that the sages said weddings of a virgin should be on a Wednesday, if they changed their mind and said, if they went sort of outside the law and said, well, we want to get married on a Sunday, it's a better day for us. Good, you can do that, but if something goes wrong and the wedding is postponed, then he does not yet undertake the responsibility for her sustenance until Wednesday comes around. And if they're still not married, now he's responsible for feeding her, or if he's a priest, she's now able to eat teruma. So therefore, according to the same line of reasoning, if the husband fell ill, or if the bride fell ill, or in a case when she began to menstruate and the wedding had to be postponed, from which we learned that they would arrange things, and that's why they arrange weddings kind of quickly, as you see. They don't plan so far in advance, but they would, if a woman was menstruating on her wedding night, they would postpone the wedding so that she would not be menstruating on their wedding night, because they're going to be secluded together, and that's the night when they're supposed to consummate the wedding, the marriage. So, therefore, according to the same line of reasoning, the husband fell ill, or the bride fell ill, or in a case where she began to menstruate and the wedding had to be postponed, he similarly need not provide her sustenance from the designated time, as he did not initiate the delay. Okay, so wait a minute. So when does he become responsible for feeding her? You're saying that, well, if they were planning to do it on Sunday, he's not responsible for feeding her until Wednesday, because that's Wednesday's the day that the sages designated that these weddings should occur. So are we going to learn out from that generally, if they're supposed to get married and then there's a postponement, that he's not responsible? What is the law? If a date was set for the wedding and it was postponed due to unavoidable circumstances, this is the halacha. For example, the bride or groom fell ill, or the bride began to menstruate, then the groom is not required to provide sustenance for his betrothed. Okay, so he doesn't have to if the reason for the postponement was circumstances beyond his control. That actually is where they ended up in this discussion. We're not there yet. And there are those who raised it as a dilemma. If the groom fell ill, what is the ruling with regard to his obligation to provide for her sustenance? There, in the case where the designated time arrived on Sunday, what is the reason that he is exempt? It is due to the fact that he was forced to postpone the wedding by circumstances beyond his control. Well, here too, isn't he forced by circumstances beyond his control, and he should therefore be exempt? Or perhaps there is a distinction between the cases. There, he was forced by an ordinance that was instituted by the sages, that a virgin marries on Wednesday, and if they were planning to do it on Sunday, and then it was postponed, okay, so he's exempt because the sages said you'd get married on Wednesday. However, here, that is not the case, right? If they were planning to do it on Wednesday, and then something came up, somebody got sick or she's menstruating or whatever, and they have to postpone the wedding, shouldn't he be liable to take over her sustenance? Or is it because the fact is she's remaining in her father's house until they actually get married? He should be exempt from having to provide her sustenance since they're not married yet. And if you say that if he fell ill, he provides her sustenance at the time designated for the wedding, then if she fell ill, what is the ruling? Can he say to her, well, I'm standing here prepared to wed you, and if you are not prepared, it is not my fault? Or perhaps she can say to him that his field was inundated, i.e., her illness is tantamount to a natural disaster that befell him, and he must nevertheless provide for her. I think that there should not be a distinction between he got sick or she got sick, where you would say that, well, if he got sick, it's his fault, and if she got sick, it's her fault. And they don't make such a distinction. And if you say that if she fell ill, she can say to him that his field was inundated. So if she became a menstruating woman and the wedding was postponed, would you still have the same ruling? Is this too considered an unavoidable circumstance like illness, and he must provide for her, or was this predictable? If she began menstruating at the time of her set period, do not raise the dilemma, as it is clear that she cannot say to him that his field was inundated. It was predictable. But here the circumstance was avoidable, and postponement of the wedding could be attributable to her because she could have predicted that. When you should raise a dilemma is in a case where the menstruation began not at the time of her set period. What is the ruling there? Since it is not the time of her set period, it is comparable to a case of her being ill, and she can say to him that his field was inundated. Bad luck. It's circumstances out of your control. It's something that happened to you. You should pay for my sustenance. Or, perhaps, since there are some women whose set period changes, it is avoidable, and its legal status is like menstruation at the time of her set period, and postponement of the wedding would be attributable to her, in which case he could say, I'm exempt. And Rav Achai resolved these dilemmas, all these questions, through a careful reading of the Mishna. If the time arrived and they were not married, the brides are entitled to eat from his food and eat teruma. It doesn't teach, and the grooms didn't marry in the active form. Rather, it teaches, and the brides were not married in the passive form. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances described in the phrase, they were not married? If the brides postponed the marriage, why do they eat from his food and eat teruma? Rather, is it not referring to a case where they were compelled by circumstances beyond their control in that manner? For example, the bride falling ill or beginning to menstruate, and it teaches the brides eat from his food and eat teruma, and is his bad fortune that is responsible for his situation. Rav Ashi said, actually, I will say to you, in any case of unavoidable circumstances, whether they affect him or they affect her, she doesn't eat from his food. And the Mishnah is referring to a case where the groom postpones the wedding. If the groom postpones the wedding, okay. That's not circumstances beyond his control. He made a choice to postpone the wedding, so for sure now he has to feed her. And that's what the Mishnah is talking about. And by right, the Tan of the Mishnah should have taught they didn't marry, which would have established that grooms caused the postponement. And since the Tana taught the first clause of the Mishnah cited above in terms of a bride, that the sages give a virgin 12 months, it taught the latter clause in terms of a bride. Therefore, no inference may be drawn from the formulation of the latter clause of that Mishnah. Only if the groom postpones the wedding is he obligated to provide sustenance for the women when the time designated for the wedding arrives. If the circumstances are beyond their control, he doesn't assume responsibility for her sustenance until they get married. Rava said, and although delays caused by circumstances beyond his control exempt the groom from providing support to his betrothed at the time originally designated for the wedding, with regard to bills of divorce, that is not so. And now we're going to go into a little digression on bills of divorce, a get, which is actually the subject of the next tractate after this one. But here, the idea is, so if it's a circumstance beyond his control, he doesn't assume responsibility for her, that delays the wedding, he doesn't assume responsibility for her sustenance. How is this related to a bill of divorce? Because if somebody gives a conditional bill of divorce, as we're about to see, where you give a certain condition, where, for example, this is your bill of divorce, if my little brother jumps 10 feet in the air, right? And maybe he's being sarcastic because obviously his little brother can't jump 10 feet in the air. But then his little brother takes a jump and, an NBA center happens to be walking by and gives the kid a boost, totally unpredictable, unexpected, but now he jumps 10 feet in the air, the condition was fulfilled. And so even though it was a circumstance beyond his control, now we say that the condition was fulfilled and that divorce would be valid. And this has very interesting implications, as we shall see. Know that this is not so. Apparently, Rava maintains that unavoidable circumstances have no legal standing with regard to bills of divorce, as opposed to in this delay of the wedding. If one stipulated that the bill of divorce will take effect only with the fulfillment of a condition, even if that condition was fulfilled due to circumstances beyond his control, the bill of divorce takes effect. And the Gemara asks, from where does Rava learn this principle? If we say it is from that which we learned in a Mishna in Tractate Gittin, page 76b, with regard to one who said to his wife, "This is your bill of divorce if I do not return from now until the conclusion of 12 months. And he died within those 12 months. This document is not a valid bill of divorce. Now, this is a much more real-world type of scenario. When do you give such a bill of divorce? He gave it wrong is the issue, but the concept is a man is going off to war. And it's possible that in the war, he'll die and his corpse will be lost, right? And he'll be just missing in action. He'll be dead, but he'll be, end up under a pile of bodies that gets buried. Something terrible happened. He gets blown up, and no one knows what happened to him. So then his wife would become an aguna. She would become stranded because there's not even a single witness to come back and say that her husband died. So he might give a conditional bill of divorce, which says, this is your bill of divorce if I don't return from the war, right? And then she will be a divorcee and she's free to remarry, not an aguna who's stranded waiting for her husband to come home. The problem here is the formulation. He needs to say, this is your bill of divorce from now. From now. If I don't return in 12 months, you are divorced from this moment when I give you the bill of divorce. If he says, this is your bill of divorce if I don't come back, and he doesn't say from now, then the problem is that he's saying that, and then he dies while he's away, and it's even known that he died, right? So then the problem would be that the bill of divorce is expected to take hold after he's dead. But after he's dead, he can't divorce her. She's already a widow, and it's too late for a divorce. So when you're giving a conditional bill of divorce, it has to be worded carefully. Right? This is your bill of divorce if I do not return from now until the conclusion of 12 months, and he died within those 12 months. This document is not a valid bill of divorce. Therefore, if she has no children from her deceased husband, the laws of levirate marriage would apply to her. And the Gemara infers, if he died, that is when it is not a bill of divorce, since a divorce cannot take effect posthumously. By inference, in cases involving other circumstances beyond his control, for example, if he fell ill. This is your bill of divorce if I do not return in 12 months. Now, he's planning to come back, but then he gets sick. He's not dead. He's sick. He doesn't come back after 12 months. That is a valid bill of divorce, and at that moment, she would be divorced from him. Now, the Gemara refutes that proof. Well, and perhaps, actually, I will say to you that in the case where he falls ill, it is also not a bill of divorce. And the Mishna cited the case of death merely as an example of circumstances beyond his control. And the reason that example itself was chosen is to teach us that there is no bill of divorce posthumously. Even if the divorce is not conditional and the husband simply states that it will take effect after he dies, it is not a valid bill of divorce. You can't say, if I die, then we are divorced. Right? Because now that once he died, she's already a widow. You can't make a posthumous bill of divorce, especially a conditional one. So the Gemara asks, does it come to teach that there is no bill of divorce posthumously? Wasn't it already taught in the first clause of the Mishnah in Gittin 72a that if one on his deathbed said to his wife, this is your bill of divorce if I die, or this is your bill of divorce if I die from this illness, or this is your bill of divorce after I die, he has said nothing. The bill of divorce does not take effect after his death. Right, that's what we understand. So the Gemara answers, well, perhaps it was necessary for the first clause to mention specifically the case of death to exclude that which our rabbi said, and not to exclude the case of one who fell ill, as it is taught in a Baraisa, and our rabbis permitted her to remarry in a case where he died within the 12 months that he stipulated. And we said, who are our rabbis mentioned here? And Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, it is the court that permitted the oil of Gentiles for consumption. That was a historical thing that originally Jews were not permitted to consume the oil of Gentiles. All through the first and second temple period, that was the case. But eventually, that was the law. But in the late second temple period, it just became, I guess, very difficult to get oil that was only from Jews. And Jews were, regularly consuming olive oil that came from Gentiles. It's not the same issue as with wine. Jews can never drink wine that was manufactured by Gentiles because there's a concern that the Gentiles might have offered a libation with that wine to their idolatrous gods, right? That was always the case in terms of wine. But oil didn't have that issue. And eventually there was a court that came, and it was the court of Yehuda Nasiya, the grandson of Yehuda Hanasi, who said it has become widespread practice that the people are consuming oil from Gentiles in violation of this old rabbinic decree. It was not a Torah law, and so they rescinded that rabbinic decree lest the people sort of scoff, the laws of the rabbis. And so it was that same court who permitted her to remarry in this case, in a case where he died within the 12 months that he stipulated. Now, which case are we talking about? Where he said, this is your bill of divorce on condition that I don't return for 12 months. And while he was away, he died, but that shouldn't work because it's posthumous. Or are we saying, well, the fact is he didn't die, and it was a circumstance beyond his control that he happened to die, but the bottom line is he didn't return, and so it should work, shouldn't it? It was in this regard that they hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who said, the time written in a document proves when it takes effect, meaning this is your bill of divorce if I don't return in 12 months. So even though he didn't say, this is your bill of divorce from this moment if I don't return in 12 months, and then whether he died or got sick or something else held him back, doesn't matter. Retroactively, the divorce took hold at the moment he handed her the get. It only became, the condition was only fulfilled when he didn't return after 12 months, and it's irrelevant that it was death that caused him not to return, because she becomes divorced from the moment he handed her the bill of divorce. And rather, proof may be cited from the latter clause of the Mishnah. If a man says to his wife, this is your bill of divorce from now, that's the correct formulation, from now, if I do not return from now until the conclusion of 12 months, and he died within those 12 months, this is a valid bill of divorce. This is the law in a case where he dies. And the same is true if he fell ill. If the divorce takes effect when his failure to return is attributable to death, the ultimate circumstance beyond his control, all the more so it should take effect if it is attributable to a less extreme circumstance. Again, it works because the bill of divorce is valid from the moment he handed it to her. It only vested, as it were, when the condition was met. And the fact that the condition was met through something that he didn't predict or that was beyond his control is irrelevant, because he said, this is your bill of divorce from this moment if I don't return after 12 months. And the reason he didn't return doesn't matter. But the Gemara rejects this proof. Perhaps the divorce takes effect specifically in the case where he died because he is not amenable to have his wife before her yavam. He doesn't want his wife to end up marrying his brother, and that's why he gives her this conditional bill of divorce. However, if other circumstances beyond his control cause the condition to be fulfilled, where yibum is not a consideration, his intention is that the bill of divorce will not take effect. This is an argument saying that, well, he didn't, because the condition that he intended to only be met, in case he died in the war, was in fact that, he said, if I don't return within 12 months, and what he meant was if I die in the war, and then the condition ended up being met by he was ill or he was prevented from getting all the way back because, he missed his train or something, you might think that that's not what he had in mind, and therefore the bill of divorce doesn't vest. And what we're actually learning here is, no, in the law of the bill of divorce, it doesn't matter that the situation was beyond his control. If he created a condition and it was met, then the bill of divorce becomes valid so long as all the other aspects of the bill of divorce are valid, like it's not posthumous, it was properly worded, it was properly written, etc. And rather, proof may be cited from this case, where a certain man who said to the agents with whom he entrusted the bill of divorce, if I do not return from now until after 30 days have passed, let this be a bill of divorce. And then I presume they're going to hand it to the wife as his agent. And he came at the end of 30 days, before the deadline passed, but he was prevented from crossing the river by the ferry that was located on the other side of the river. So he did not come within the designated time, right? He did everything that he expected to do to make sure that he wouldn't get divorced. He got all the way back, but he was unable to cross the river because the ferry was out. Now that's obviously beyond his control. It's not what he intended. He intended to get back in time to fulfill, so that the condition would go unfulfilled since he got back before 30 days elapsed. And yet, now this circumstance beyond his control that the ferry was out meant that the condition was fulfilled. He didn't actually get back before the 30 days, even though he was on the other side of the river going, hey, I made it, I got back. And he said to the people on the other side of the river, see that I have come, see that I have come. Shmuel said, this is not considered to be a return, meaning he didn't make it back in 30 days. Apparently, even if the condition was fulfilled due to circumstances beyond his control, the condition is considered fulfilled. And the Gemara rejects this proof. Why are we talking about all of this? Because remember that when a wedding gets postponed by circumstances beyond the groom's control, then he is exempt from having to take over the sustenance of his wife because she's not yet his wife. But with a bill of divorce, if circumstances beyond his control cause the condition on his bill of divorce to be fulfilled, then even though that wasn't his intent, he's divorced. Now, the Gemara rejects this proof that Shmuel said, well, he got to the edge of the river, it's close enough, but no, it's not close enough. So the Gemara rejects that. And perhaps unavoidable circumstances that are common and could be anticipated, for example, that the ferry would be out, these kinds of things are different, since he should have stipulated that exception when establishing the condition, and since he did not stipulate it, he brought the failure to arrive upon himself. Since it was predictable that a ferry might be out, he should have said, this is the bill of divorce on condition that I don't return within 30 days, unless I get close enough and the ferry's out, and that's why I don't finish it. So rather, Rava is stating a law based on his own reasoning. Circumstances beyond one's control are not a factor in determining whether or not a condition is fulfilled. And why is this? It is due to virtuous women and due to licentious women. What does this mean? The Gemara articulates, there is concern due to virtuous women, and we're almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. There is concern due to virtuous women. Is like this. If you said, let it not be a bill of divorce, if the reason that the condition was not fulfilled was due to circumstances beyond his control, then sometimes where he was not detained unavoidably, but he fulfilled the condition willingly in order to effect the divorce. Like he was on his way back, he could make it back within the 30 days so that the divorce would not take effect. And then he said, you know what? I don't want to be married to this woman. And so he just, sat down and had a picnic on the other side of the river. And so the condition vested and now he's divorced. Okay, well, he had the choice to just give her the divorce anyway, but it worked out like this. But maybe she doesn't know what he's doing. So he's doing that, but the word doesn't get to her that he did that. And the wife thinks that he was detained unavoidably. And if the condition didn't vest, if we didn't have a consistent law that, listen, all that matters is he said 30 days and he didn't get back in 30 days, we're not going to look into what was the cause of the circumstances, because if she's not sure what his reason for not getting back on time, whether it was avoidable or unavoidable, and she's going to think, well, he loves me, he's trying to get back, he's not back yet, but I'm sure we're still married, and then she's going to be stuck, and she might be in Aguna for a long time or forever. She will be deserted and forever unable to marry. And on the other hand, the reason we want to have a consistent policy is also due to licentious women. And this is, if you said, let it not be a bill of divorce, then sometimes when he was detained unavoidably, and she thinks that he was not detained unavoidably, she goes and remarries. And the result will be that the bill of divorce is void, and her children from the second marriage will be mamzers, products of an adulterous relationship. In other words, to put it more simply, you want predictability in the laws of divorce. So it's much simpler to say, he said, this is a bill of divorce if I don't come back in 30 days. Did he come back in 30 days or not? And now everyone is clear on whether that woman is divorced or not. All right, that's what we've got today. Let's see if we've got questions on this first page of Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. And reminder, today's our last day of class. I go on hiatus to go to Israel for the Maccabea games, and we will resume on Tuesday, July 26th. And we'll put an announcement about that on the Facebook page as well. Tom, when compiling the Gemara, did they take every Mishnah in order, or did they hop around and skip some? I know it differs from the Bavli to the Yerushalmi, and also that there are not tractates for every volume of the Mishnah. But in extant tractates, how did they choose the order of the Mishnayos covered? So my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding of this, Tom, is first of all, you laid out the question beautifully. It's exactly right. First, there was the Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, around the year 200 of the Common Era. And prior to that, the Mishnah were these teachings of the rabbis that were just, memorized by all of the sages who were sages and studying these laws. And who would act as judges for the nation of Israel. And when people had a question and they needed a ruling, they would go to a sage to get the answer. Because of the Roman persecution, so many of them were being killed. Yehuda Hanasi said, we have to write this down because it might be that all the sages are destroyed, and but the Jewish nation will survive, and they won't know what the law is. So let us write down an authoritative version of the most authoritative teachings, right? And so the teachings that got into the Mishnah, those are called Mishnayos, and collectively the Mishnah. and teachings which are from the same period but not quite as authoritative are called baraises, right? Then, for the next 300 years, the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, right, that next layer of commentary, argued about what the Mishnahs mean, and that commentary is the Gemara. And as you said, there were two places where that project was going on to create a commentary on the Mishnah. One was in the Babylonian Jewish community, where there was not Roman persecution, and the other was in the land of Israel, where there was Roman persecution. And over there is the Bavli, Talmud Bavli, and over here is the Talmud Yerushalmi. And the Bavli ended up getting completed, and that's why we're doing Daf Yomi in the Bavli. And the Yerushalmi went unfinished because of that persecution in the Holy Land. They were not able to ultimately finish the Yerushalmi. And as you point out, not all volumes of Mishnah received the Gemara treatment, as it were. So if you look at a collection of the Mishnah, for example, you'll find Avos, normally referred to as Pirkei Avos, the chapters of the fathers. That's a volume of Mishnah, but it doesn't have Gemara associated with it, and there are other volumes like that. In the volumes of Mishnah that received the Gemara treatment, my understanding is they did go the same order of the Mishnahs that are laid out in that particular volume of Mishnah, like Brachos, the first volume of the Talmud. The Mishnahs that are in Brachos, or the Mishnahs here in Kesubos, are in the same order when you just look at a collection of Mishnah, and they don't scramble the order. They go Mishnah by Mishnah, adding their commentary in the Gemara. Paula, forgive my ignorance. Are pending marriages, as far as choice of day, still remain fairly consistent? Is this something carefully directed by rabbi? Are you asking, do Jews still get married on, virgins on Wednesdays and non-virgins on Thursday? No. My understanding is no. However, it is pretty typical to get married on a Sunday, sometimes even on a Saturday night if it's in the winter, but that's very difficult. So Jewish weddings are usually on Sundays because weekends are useful for people. But the preferable day to get married is on Tuesday night, which actually is the same as Wednesday. Why in ancient times would they say you should get married during the day on Wednesday rather than Tuesday night? Because the preparations could be very lengthy and exhaustive, and they're running around like crazy. They don't have caterers doing everything, right? The man is doing it with his friends. They get exhausted. Tuesday night comes around, the wedding gets started very late, and by the time it's time for the new husband to fulfill his obligation for his willing bride, it's so late at night, they're exhausted, it's a mess, and so they would prefer to get married on Wednesday during the day. But irrespective of this idea that courts meet on Thursday, why is Tuesday night a good night to get married? And that's because it's the third day of the week. Am I messing this up? I guess Tuesday night is already Wednesday and it's the fourth day of the week. But I mean, my understanding is I'm probably getting this wrong. But what I recall is that the reason why they prefer to do a Jewish wedding, and maybe it's on Monday night into Tuesday, is because in the 7 days of creation, on the third day, God says it is good twice, right? So one of the days he doesn't say, and it was good. He doesn't say it at all. And on this other day, he says it twice. And I'm pretty sure that's the third day, which is Tuesday. But then that would mean that the wedding would be on Monday night. So now I've confused myself, but maybe somebody can look this up and get it right for me. But that's sort of like ideal. But when people are doing big weddings, it's usually on a Sunday. Okay. Tom, in case of such a divorce, can they remarry? Why not? Right? A husband and wife can remarry, like where he says like he didn't really want to fulfill the condition, but it was fulfilled by circumstances beyond his control. And so now they're divorced. Can they remarry? Sure, they can remarry as long as in between, while they were divorced, she didn't go off and marry some other guy and sleep with him. As long as she didn't do that, she remains permitted to her first husband and they can remarry, but they're prohibited to each other until they remarry. All right, that's what I've got for us today. It's wonderful learning with you. I'm going to miss you while I'm in Israel, but I'll try to keep posting from the Maccabee Games and other matters in Israel. And with God's help, we'll all keep reading, doing our dafs, and we'll reconvene on Tuesday, July 26th at 6 p.m. And we'll do a highlights show of all, of like really good teachings from all these pages that we miss. And if there's so many juicy ones, maybe it'll be a 2-day highlight show. But at any rate, we are on hiatus until July 26th. Good Shabbos.